So the schools that I am at are Madison, Hoover, Marshall, and Pulliam.
Okay, hi, I'm Lana Scott. I'm also a program specialist for special ed. I do support the deaf hard of hearing program, mod severe, mild mod resource, and I did previously work with the OT program as well.
And I'm Mitch Flores. I'm also a program specialist, and I support the mod severe programming and the autism programming.
So you guys, as we go through this, go ahead and ask questions if you want. We love, normally when Angela and I do trainings, we just love getting feedback and interaction with the group. So feel free, if you have a question, if you just prefer to type it, Mitch is going to go ahead and man the chat box as well. So if he sees one that everybody should hear, he'll just stop us as well, okay? This training that Angela and I are doing today, sorry, Mitch, I didn't put you on the PowerPoint here because,
okay.
You know, we didn't know that you were going to be so dedicated to your job this week. He just got married, so we gave him some slack on presenting. So Mitch Flores is also presenting this, and it typically is a full day worth of training, so we cut it down a little bit. So some things we'll go over fairly quickly. If you have any questions, there's links on the PowerPoint that will be emailed to you, and you can also reach out to any one of us as well. And in the future, we'll be doing more in-depth trainings on some of these topics.
And if you could also put the email address that you've been using for your teacher orientation to get all of those emails. I know that you probably aren't set up with district email yet, but if you are, put your district email in the chat, and then if not, whatever email address that you've been using to receive all your Stockton Unified documents. And we'll go ahead and send you out the PowerPoint, because we're going to, like Lana said, it's a longer training. It's normally a 5-hour training that we do, that we've kind of condensed down into 1 hour. So we're going to kind of breeze through things, and we're going to skip over some parts, but in the actual PowerPoint is more information. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Some hard facts about behavior. So today's training is all about managing behavior and the social emotional needs of your students. So all behavior is learned. It serves a specific purpose. So it's the same for adults, children, animals. Behavior happens for a reason. Whoever is doing the behavior gets something out of doing that behavior, so it's learned throughout their lifetime. Behavior is related to the context in which it occurs. So as we know, we don't have the same work behavior as the same home behavior. It changes depending on the context. Same thing with our kiddos. Behavior is different in the classroom than it is at home, which will be really interesting with the distance learning, because they're going to be in school at home. So it'll be quite different for a lot of our students. For every year behavior is in place, it takes at least 1 month for that behavior to have a significant change. So I do a lot of behavior support in the classroom, and I always get asked, oh, it's not working. This intervention's not working. I've been trying it and being consistent with it, and it's still not working. But it takes quite a long time for behavior to change, and you have to be consistent. So for every year it's in place, it takes at least a month for you to see a difference in that behavior, and that's with consistent behavior intervention implementation. So children comply with the rules 80% of the time. However, they're complimented for their behavior for less than, can anyone take a guess for how? So we correct 80%, our children comply with 80% of the rules, but how often are we noticing, how often do children get complimented for being on task? Any guesses? Less than 10, okay, that's Camila.
Like 7 out of 10 times?
7 out of 10, okay. All right, go ahead and click it, Lana. So 2% of the time. So yeah, very, very small percentage of the time. So it's where is the motivation to want to behave if our children are only getting noticed for the correct behavior 2% of the time? If the child wants attention, they're going to get attention any way they know how, and usually that's by acting out. Okay, so first things first. So we got to look at it. We have to kind of change our lens and change the way that we look at behavior. So the fish is saying, whoa, half empty, definitely half empty. The other fish is saying, just listen, you're always such the pessimist. So we have to always look at the cup half full. We have to have a positive spin on behavior, and it's very challenging because some of our students have very difficult behavior. And it's hard not to, if you're getting kicked or hit or any type of aggression, it's very difficult not to take it personally, but we have to understand why the behavior is occurring if we're going to try and change that behavior. Okay, so understanding behavior. So you want to look at it as a problem behavior or a skill deficit, and it really changes on how you view it is going to change how you intervene and how you plan to change that behavior. So if we see it as a behavior problem, this implies that the student is deliberately engaging in behavior by choice. They're making a decision to misbehave, or they're making a choice to be non-compliant. Whereas if we see it as a skill deficit, it implies that the student lacks the appropriate skills to get his or her needs met, and they need to be taught and reinforced appropriate behaviors by staff. So we really have to look at it as a skill deficit. It's not that our students are wanting to misbehave or wanting to create a difficult situation. It's really a skill deficit. They don't have the correct skills that they need to be able to behave appropriately in a certain context. And so really, when we intervene, we have to give them the skills that they need. We need to teach them. So behavior, what gets noticed? Students engage in many behaviors throughout the day. The behaviors that are most likely to get noticed are excessive. So the inappropriate behaviors that get noticed are talking out, screaming, hitting, acts of aggression, or if it's a deficit. So deficit behaviors also need to be examined. So if they're not talking, there's limited interactions, lack of eye contact, those behaviors are often less noticed than the excessive behaviors. So we're definitely going to notice a student that's screaming or hitting. So challenging behavior is a combination of a skill deficit, so something that they need to learn, but then also behavioral excesses, so something that needs to be unlearned or relearned. Again, thinking about behavior, it's something that has gotten the student what they want in the past, so that's why they do the behavior. And so they need to unlearn it or relearn a different skill in order to get that same thing. So we think about the child in the grocery store with the parent, and they're screaming and crying because they want that candy bar. The parent buys them the candy bar. They've just learned, if I scream and cry, I'm going to get that candy bar. So when they come into your classroom and they see that toy that they want, what are they going to do? Scream and cry, because that's a behavior that's worked for them in the past. Whereas now we need to teach them a skill to get the same need met. So we teach them to ask for, depending on what their level is of ability, either sign for or request that item, and then it serves the same purpose, and it's an easier way to get it. But coming into your classroom, they're not going to know that, especially if you're working with the really young ones. And that they've been home for an extended amount of time too. So we might see more behavior problems coming back to school. So common, I can't see what the top of that says, but something about, what does that say, Lana, at the top there? So for expressive communication, if a child has difficulty communicating or verbalizing, if you work with a more impacted population, they're going to have a hard time talking and being able to verbalize. So that's likely to result in a tantrum or aggression. If you can't get out what it is that you want to say, you're going to get frustrated, just like our students. When they're not able to communicate with you what they want or what they need, they're going to act out. So it's going to result in a tantrum or aggression. If they have difficulties with receptive communication, being able to follow rules and being able to understand what's being asked of them, it's going to result in noncompliance or meltdowns. And self-regulation, a lot of our students in special education have difficulties with self-regulation regardless of their ability level. And this will result in stemming, so the self-stimulatory behaviors or repetitive behaviors and meltdowns. So if we see these as excesses or deficits, then we also see what the behavior excesses are. So all behavior is learned, like I said before. It's at some point in that child's life, that behavior has gotten them what they wanted. So that is why they're doing the behavior. The outcome results in the behavior occurring again. So once that child is reinforced for a behavior, they're going to continue doing that behavior because it's gotten them what they wanted in the past. So the consequences or results of behavior usually tells us the function of the behavior. So you're going to hear a lot, if you've taken the course on behavior before, you've talked about the function. And that's really important, is understanding what purpose is that behavior serving? What function does that behavior have? Because that's really going to tell us where we need to intervene at. So behavior problems, punishing bad behavior doesn't work. We know research tells us that when we reward behavior, it's much more effective at behavior change than punishing. Punishment doesn't work, doesn't have the same effect that we would expect it to. So it's really important to consider, what can we reward? What are we trying to teach them? What replacement behavior can we reward? It results in avoidance and withdrawal. So when students are punished, they'll avoid the situation or they'll withdraw from it. And this has long-term behavior change, means teaching new skills. So definitely seeing it as whatever behavior problem is occurring, we see it as a skill deficit that needs to be taught. The student needs to be taught a new skill. And we want to determine the purpose of maladaptive behavior and teach the student a better way. Prevention and intervention. So antecedent-based interventions, we don't have a lot of time to get into this today, but it's a really effective way at avoiding behavior problems from ever occurring in the first place. So antecedent, when we talk about antecedent-based interventions, we talk about what we can do before the behavior occurs to influence the occurrence of the behavior. This is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. It's how you can avoid the problem from occurring in the first place. The intervention on the behavior. So once the behavior has occurred and is occurring, what we can do during the behavior to influence it, and then consequent-based interventions are what we can do after. Whatever the consequence was of that, this is probably the most common that I see used in the classroom, is what happens after the behavior will influence the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future. So again, every behavior has a function. Behavior change is based on function, not form. Therefore, it's really essential to understand the function of the behavior. So why it's occurring. Behavior is often communicative. It's a way for children without speech to communicate. Even children that have difficulty with speech are going to use their behavior to communicate. And behavior is a function of the interactions between the person and the environment. So it's learned behavior that serves a purpose for the child that will get them what they want or need. So it's based on, and it changes depending on what environment they're in, because not everything's available in different environments. And not all those same rules apply in different environments either. So the most common functions of behavior, the reason why behaviors occur, are attention seeking. Either the child is trying to seek attention from an adult or peer. It could be escape driven. So they might be avoiding a situation or trying to get away from an aversive situation. Tangible, so they're trying to gain access to something. Could be something in the room, something in somebody else's room. Or automatic. This is like self-stimulatory behavior where they just enjoy the sensation. This is much less likely to occur. The three that I see the most often occurring are attention, escape, and tangible. They're trying to gain access. So using data to determine the function, first we want to have a baseline understanding. So if we have a behavior happening in the class and we want to focus on changing that behavior, the first thing we're going to do is collect baseline data. We want to see how often that behavior is occurring before we do anything else at all. So that way we know where to intervene. We want to determine patterns as to environmental stimuli. So who's present in the environment when the behavior occurs, what tasks are they working on, what's the noise level, or antecedent triggers. So is it something else going on? Are they being told no, et cetera? So we want to figure out what the patterns are to determine, and then we want to determine target behavior, including the time of day, length, frequency of this specific observable target behavior, so we can tell who is involved. So first we want to figure out what's going on, how often the behavior is occurring, what's going on in the environment, and it's really important to be detailed at this level because it could be something that you don't even notice is happening. It could be a look that another student is giving them during time of day, or it could be something very small that's triggering a behavior to happen. So it's really important to be very observant when you're collecting data. And then you want to focus on what behavior you're going to target, a pattern for consequence. So what's happening after the behavior. So start with data collection. So to collect data on the interfering behavior, team members should use ABC data charts. So ABC is one of the most simplest forms of behavior data that we can collect. And it's where we collect data we track what's happening right before the behavior, then what the behavior was, and then what happened immediately after the behavior. And this information will be used to help determine why the student might be engaging in a particular behavior. ABC data, the observer records a descriptive amount of behaviors of interest, including what happens before, during, and after. And we record the data to determine what we need to adjust, either the antecedent, so what happens before the behavior, or the consequence, what happens after the behavior, because that's what's going to modify the target behavior. A little bit about the A, the antecedent. When identifying antecedents, you want to consider the questions. Where does the behavior happen? With whom does the behavior occur? So who's present in the environment? When does the behavior happen? Is it during a specific time of the day, all times of the day? What activity is occurring, and then what other students are doing when the behavior, and then what other teachers and adults are doing when the behavior begins. So it's also helpful to consider contributing factors such as specific staff or specific staff. So you might want to write down who's present specifically, proximity of others, how close the student is to other people, the noise level in the classroom, number of individuals in the area, and other environmental conditions. Especially if you work with students with autism, there might be something that we don't notice because they're more sensory sensitive. So they might be the lighting in the room. It could be a certain noise that's happening, texture of clothing. Again, it will vary from student to student. Additionally, it's valuable to take into account distant antecedent setting events such as medication changes. So it's a good to talk to the family. So even though you should have a clear operationally defined target behavior with examples, it's important to record as much information about the behavior of concern during your observations. So rather than writing aggressed in your notes, it might be more important to write kicked peer or hit teacher with fist, pinch peer arm. So we know, I think there's some questions too regarding behavior support. So the more detailed you are when asking for help with this behavior, the more helpful it's going to be in receiving that help, because then they're going to know where they need to intervene or where to target the intervention at. So operationally defined target behavior should be described as clearly and concisely as possible. So for the purposes of the example below, aggression is defined as an instance in which Callie's hands, feet, body, or objects come into contact with another person in a forcible way out of the context of the activity. So if you go to write a behavior intervention plan for a student, and of course you can ask for support when doing that if it's new to you, but the behavior intervention plan is going to ask you for an operationally defined target behavior. And so it's important to be specific, what it looks like. Consequences. So when identifying consequences, it may not be as clear as timeout, reprimand, or ignore. Oftentimes when observing behavior, one may find that multiple events will follow the behavior of concern. All behavior should be recorded and evaluated for its influence on the target behavior. So you want to write down anything that's occurring right after the behavior, whether or not you think it's related to the behavior or not. If it's something that's happening in the environment and it follows the behavior, then definitely you want to record that. So consequences can be positive or negative. Sometimes it's unintentional reinforcement. So for example, a student yelling out and the teacher addresses the student, that's reinforcement to some of our kiddos because they've just received attention. And if it's attention that they're trying to get, then they've just received that. So this is an example of an ABC chart. You can see here there's the date, time, activity, the antecedent, behavior, the duration, if you want to track how long the behavior is occurring for, and then the consequence. And here I have examples of this one, so I can always send this to you, or you can create your own. Sometimes it's more, I know that in a classroom, you're kind of cramped for time a lot of times. You don't have a lot of time to be recording, writing things down. So sometimes if you have activities already listed, things that happen throughout the day, antecedents that are likely to occur, behavior outcomes, then you can just check those off, and it makes it much more quick to record data. This is just another example of the same thing where you list it out, and that way you or a paraprofessional is able to just check it off.